Hey guys, Master Eiler here, coming at you with another training tip. In this episode, we're going to be talking about our hips and how they can be used in martial arts to both make your blocks and your attacks stronger. So let's get started. Hips in Korean is Huri. And in Tang Soo Do, we really focus a lot on the hips. Most martial arts do in a bunch of different ways, but Tang Soo Do is really known for using that hips. Your hips are central to the body. They are connected to both your torso and your bottom half. So if you learn how to use your hips correctly, it can make both your hand techniques and your foot techniques more powerful and effective. Let's talk about the two reasons that you want to focus on hip. The first is power. By using your hip, you're creating more distance between your body and the part that you're attacking. More distance means more time to build up speed and a more powerful attack in the end. This is really great, especially for people who aren't super muscular, because by using their hips, they can still have really strong attacks. Another reason that we really want to focus on our hips is for control. By using the hips, it's kind of like a funnel. It focuses in on one part of your body so that you can make your techniques more powerful. If I can control my hip, that control will then spread up to my arm technique or my foot technique and give me more control over where I want that technique to go and the level of power that I want with it. So there are two types of hip motion that we want to talk about today. But before I go into that, it's important to know that both of these hip motions use pushing and pulling power. I pull back my hip before pushing forward with an attack, or I close up my body pulling it in before expanding with a block. And that's the two types of hips right there. There's offensive hip, and that's for attacks most of the time. There are a few defensive moves that also use offensive hip, but we're not going to talk about those today. When we use offensive hip, we want to pull our hip back so that we can then wind up and then throw forward our attack. It's really important to know that the hip and the shoulder are connected so they move at the same time. You don't want to throw your shoulder before your hip moves forward, and you don't want to move your hip without letting that shoulder be connected to it and throwing out your attack. Defensive hip is very similar but also different. With defensive hip, we move our hip and close off. Remember that your preparations are actually a block. So when you wind up for a block, you're closing off that hip and creating a safe area where attacks can't get in. Then your hip steps out and turns forward, firing off that block at the same time. Again, just like offensive hips, they move at the same time. You want your hip to be connected to your block so that when one turns, the other one turns as well. So how do we use our hip or our Huri when we train? Well, it's really important that when you're training, you focus in on that so that you can get better. Really take it slow and break down your techniques and focus just on that midsection of the body. Feel how it turns in or pulls back. Then once you get that motion down, practice adding techniques to it so that when you step forward, you focused on your hip, you know your hip is moving the correct way, and now connect that hip to your attack or to your block. Once you get better with that, you can start doing it faster. We may practice moving slowly with our hip, but remember the hip pulls back so you have more distance, which builds speed. So as you get better with it, your hip should actually lead to faster attacks. And then finally, once you get really good at it, it should become muscle memory. You shouldn't have to think about closing off your hip or pulling it back. It should just be part of the techniques. Just like hopefully you don't have to think when you throw out a jab, eventually the hip will become part of that motion and you won't have to think about it either. Whether it's forms or board breaking or anything else you do in Tang Soo Do, hips are essential. So take what you've learned today, add it into your training, and it'll make your techniques that much better. Keep practicing, train hard, and Tang Soo.